Here we are. We're at the home stretch. You know, right when your legs are feeling really heavy and you're tired and you can't keep going, but you know, if you get across that finish line, you are in for the best part. Well, here we are. This is one of the best parts of our day. And I am so excited to introduce our paratriathlete and talking about paratriathlon engagement. We have Mr. Travis Ricks with us, who has been involved with the sport of triathlon since 2008, where he started competing in local races in his hometown of San Diego, California. He was introduced to the sport through his friends and coworkers. Again, the power of exposure. Travis became an amputee after surviving a rare form of cancer as a teenager and then very aggressive staph infection in his early 20s. This led him to volunteering and later being employed at the Challenged Athletes Foundation, which he has worked for at 12 years, helping individuals with physical disabilities to get involved, to be active, and where he is now the director of programs. He has been actively involved in the sport of triathlon for over 12 years, with 7 of them competing in nationals and international competitions. 2011, Paratriathlon National Champion. And in 2011, he was the Paratriathlon National Champion. That deserved a do-over. And over his 9 years of being on the USAT Paratriathlon Committee, 6 of which he has been the chair of the committee. Let's welcome to the Zoom, Mr. Travis Ricks.
Thanks for the introduction. It's really, really nice to be here and be part of the DEIA summit. Really, really excited to share some information on paratriathlon and just kind of help people understand a little bit more about paratriathletes and how to, work with them, get them involved. I have a long-standing just relationship with the USAT. It really was one of the first big sports that I got into after losing my leg from the cancer and the staph infections. And I would say it's where I have some of my best friendships from. And so I'll get into that a little bit. I actually put a presentation together, so hopefully I can show that and show you guys a little bit. Let's see if this will work. Can we see that? No, we'll just go ahead and do it from here. So if you can see this, so just a little bit about me. Obviously, I work in an organization to help people with disabilities. I had a great career as an athlete, as a teenager, and I, was going on to be a college-bound wrestler. I'd never actually heard of the sport of triathlon in my life, and tragically, I ended up having cancer, and I fought that, spent some time, thought I would be able to save my opportunity to continue to be an athlete by trying to save my leg. Which ultimately ended up in some major staph infections about 4 years later. And then I had to make the decision after 16 open knee surgeries to either amputate my leg and move on with my life, or to put an antibiotic spacer in and never move my knee again, bend my knee again. And I, at the time I thought my career as an athlete was over. So I chose the amputation, decided to move on. I was actually very shortly after introduced to the organization Challenge Athletes Foundation, which is where I now work, and they helped me really get back in the sport. And they are an organization that's founded from triathlon. It's here in San Diego. It was in my backyard, never knew about it. Became an official 501c3 the same year that I was diagnosed with cancer. And I came into the organization later on as a volunteer, and then they helped me with a lot of things early on, including the running leg you see in the picture here. They helped make me realize that just because you have a disability or you've had something tragic happen in your life, doesn't mean you have to stop being active. And so of course, everybody around me was a triathlete, and I thought I would give it a shot. Come to find out, this sport is really hard. And I struggled for the first couple of years, left the sport for some shorter distance stuff, and started doing track and some other things, and actually came back to it when I had gained some endurance and understood how to use my prosthetics and just was better from all the surgeries and everything that I had for the amputation. So fell in love with the sport, started racing in 2008. And I can tell you that it was the struggle bus in the beginning. But the community was so welcoming. They, had seen a lot of guys like Jim McLaren, Rudy Garcia Tolson, Sarah Reinertson out there doing triathlons. I'm in Southern California, so people knew these names. They'd seen them in races. The race directors were extremely accommodating. And so I really fell in love with the sport, despite the fact that I wasn't possibly the best person. I like to tell people I was built like a fridge and I swim like a rock. But I really just found a community of people that pushed themselves and wanted to see how far their limits could be, despite whatever their situation was, whether they're dealing with stuff at home, financial issues, they got a full plate at work, or they've had a disability and they want to get out and just be active. So really, stayed with the sport for a few years, competed internationally, got the chance to win a national championship, but I will put an asterisk or a caveat on that the two guys that were better than me, that had beat me the previous couple of years, I had taken third, didn't make it that year. So I was obviously next in line to win the national championships, but they're two great guys that I've known forever. And I will definitely say that they are way better athletes than I ever was, but I was in good company. I was traveling the world. And I realized when the competition started getting really, really good was about 2014. And I was in London for the ITU World Championships. And I just saw the level of the playing field had just, the bar was set a lot higher than when I had started. And I loved seeing that. Knew, this was a sport that I loved, but I wasn't really, trying to make the Paralympics for it. So I decided that I was going to start focusing more on grassroots and trying to get people involved. So I joined the USA Paratriathlon committee that was formed in early, I think it's been around for a while, but there was a new committee that kind of got reformed around 2009, 2010. I jumped on late 2011. And for the last 6 years, I've been the chair of the committee. I worked with some amazing people on that committee that want to see a lot of phenomenal grassroots efforts to build up paratriathlon in the community, provide that inclusion factor and accessibility factor to the sport for people with disabilities all over the United States, trying to be able to work with race directors and, youth athletes, and really just trying to give people the tools that they need to make the inclusion part of the sport, the paratriathlon part of the sport, easy. We don't want anybody to think it's difficult. And so we do a lot on that committee to really do outreach. We have athletes and coaches. We've had, officials on there, and everybody does their part to really help try to make the process as friendly, easy as possible for everybody involved. So I've enjoyed being on the committee. I talked a little bit about the organization I work with, and this is I bring this up because it helps me with my ability to talk to you guys about working with people with disabilities, and paratriathlon itself is the mission of the Challenge Athletes Foundation from the beginning was to help individuals with physical disabilities be active. And it started because we had an athlete who was in a tragic accident. He was a Yale football player, tragic accident after he left college and was acting in New York City, got hit by a bus while he was on a motorcycle, became an amputee. And he changed his life around, decided I want to be a triathlete, started doing some phenomenal stuff in the 90s. And he did, I think he put up like 10 hours and 30 minutes in Kona Ironman, which was, even at the time was hard enough for, even today, hard enough for any able-bodied person. But he was doing phenomenal things. And he was on a closed course in Southern California I believe, right around 1991, 92. And he was riding on the course. A police officer didn't see him coming and let a van through. The van clipped his bike, sent him into a pole, and then he had a tragic second accident where he became a quadriplegic. And a bunch of friends decided to get together, put an organization together to help raise funds to help individuals with disabilities like him get access to being active. And that's kind of how the organization formed. So I got involved. Triathlon's been a big part of everything. And I have worked in so many different aspects of adaptive sports that I have learned a lot about what it takes to include people in your sport, how you talk to people, how you do the outreach to get them involved, what it takes to make, the accommodations. And I've worked with a lot of committees. I've worked with adaptive surfing. I've worked with, para volleyball. I was actually a competitive Paralympic national team volleyball player for over 10 years. And just retired last year for that. Got to do some international competition. So I've been around it. and I've seen it, and I've worked with a lot of people in this sport, and we've talked a lot about what it takes to kind of help individuals with disabilities in triathlon. The engagement inclusion part, is really important. And there's a lot of phenomenal athletes already in the sport, but, we need to grow the sport. We need to keep the pipeline going for our Paralympic teams, and also just for the recreational side of the sport. It's a phenomenal sport for anybody who just wants to be active, who wants to have a community. It's a phenomenal sport for people that want to cross train for other sports. And we want to make sure the adaptive community has the ability to do that. And part of that is understanding kind of how the DEIA definitions pertain to disability, right? I think for most people, when they think of diversity, they're thinking racial, gender, sexuality, but disability does not come to the top of mind when you think of diversity all the time. And that is definitely in a part of diversity. When you think about it, you want to make sure that across the board you invite anybody from any walk of life, whether they've gone through something tragic and they've had some kind of limb loss, or they've had a spinal cord injury, or if they were born with their disability. I've seen some phenomenal athletes that were congenital athletes that didn't know they could do sports until they were in their 30s. And then people introduced to them, and they became, just a couple of them are phenomenal athletes right now. And they lived their whole life being told they couldn't do that. And, that brings, equity. You want to make sure, I heard it earlier on one of the talks, equity is really about, you can level the playing field, but when somebody's already at a disadvantage, when you say it's fair, they've already had to reach to that level. They had to do so much to get there that somebody else didn't. And when you think about disability, most people with disabilities don't have a lot of income. They have to overcome a lot of health problems to be able to get to a point where they can be active and get involved in sports like this. And, the price tag to get to these events, the price tag to get to the equipment, you can get a bike for a nice, decent bike for $2,500, but to get a decent hand cycle, you're spending $1,000 more than that, or, it can be a $12,000 for a competitive hand cycle. I know we have bikes at that price, so some of you guys out there get that. But then, for those of you who have to buy a pair of shoes, our wheelchair athletes have to actually go buy a racing chair, which is another $3,000. Prosthetics can cost anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000. And those pieces of equipment are not covered by insurance. Any of that is. So that's one of the reasons why I love where I work, because we do provide grants for that. And we are a resource for athletes to be able to get that access, which is at the bottom here. And, access is a big deal. Race directors being able to make sure that there's accommodations, making sure that clubs have accessible buildings or facilities or workouts that include these athletes. All of that, leads up to the inclusion factor. The more that you can do to think about these things when you're bringing athletes with disabilities in is really going to add to your inclusion factor. And the inclusion factor is going to up the game for everybody. When people feel like it doesn't matter who you are and where you come from, you're going to be involved and you're going to be welcomed. Everybody is going to have a better time. There's going to be no animosity, and people are just going to have a lot less anxiety about being included and being involved. So just real quick, I won't read all this, but paratriathlon, for anybody who's on here who doesn't really understand what paratriathlon is, it's triathlon for para athletes. It was first introduced to the Paralympic Games in 2016, but it's been around for a lot longer than that. I actually got involved and was there in 2010 in Budapest when we were told that the sport was going to be included in the 2016 Paralympic Games. And I remember that moment as a big win for the sport. And it was really cool to be able to be there for that as part of the team that was competing. And then to see some of my friends who were just getting started at the time go on and be athletes in the Paralympics in Rio. And, I've got some amazing friends that have been involved. But one of the things I want to point out here is that paratriathlon isn't just competitive triathlon. We actually at USAT have two types of categories for paratriathletes. We've got an open category, and then we got a paratriathlon category. And the open category really is created to allow access and inclusion for anybody who doesn't fit within the rules of USAT or ITU on that competitive side. It's not to say that they're not competitive. A lot of open category athletes are competitive, but they don't use maybe the same equipment that you need to use for the 6 categories that are available in paratriathlon. It is really about just making sure everyone has access to the sport, and no matter which way they can or want to do it, they have the ability to be involved, and they know that there's inclusion for them. They're thought about the process in the process through the race directors and through the registration and just everything that USAT has done. I can tell you, USAT has done a phenomenal job of building the paratriathlon inclusion factor. I know the Paralympics has helped. It has created a lot of notoriety for the sport, but they have put a lot of work into being able to make sure that the funding's available for these athletes, the support's available to these athletes. There's committees that are available to be able to help direct athletes and race directors in what they want to do. So you saw at the bottom, 6 classifications for athletes based on disability. And it's actually based on function, not disability. I take that back. What they do is look at people's impairments and how they're able to use that. And they take how they perform with those impairments and they put them in classifications based on points that they get in their classification meetings. And that really evens the playing field for these athletes. You have a wheelchair division, you've got 4 ambulatory divisions, and then you have a VI, visually impaired and blind division. And some of those, there's what we call handicap, where they do actually have subgroups, and they put some different timing in to allow it to be a fair playing field. Because for someone who has a visual impairment and somebody who's totally blind, it isn't really a fair field unless you do some kind of time adjustment. So they have that. That's the competitive side of things. What I want to talk about now is really just why you should include paratriathletes in whatever you're doing. One of the biggest things is everyone deserves the right to participate and compete. Number one, hands down. It doesn't matter who you are and what your background is. You should be given the option and the opportunity. That's inclusion, right? That's access. The other thing is more athletes participating in the sport. It's better for everybody, right? The races that have athletes in them get more visibility, higher visibility of the sport, because the media wants to come and see these athletes overcoming these obstacles. It raises awareness of what the sport can do for someone, and it allows more people to get eyes on the sport. But one of the other things that I always understood when I first started was it motivates other athletes in the sport. When they see somebody, when you're struggling on the course, and we've all been there, and an athlete with a disability goes flying past you, and we do, you will notice that all of a sudden people start perking up, and people start getting to the point where they're like, if that person can do it, I can do it. And it motivates people to really do things they didn't think they could. And I can tell you that's not the purpose of para athletes. We don't go out there going to motivate. And we'll talk about the whole inspirational word in a little bit, but motivating other people is a side effect of including people in your training, your clubs, in your races. And this is something that I really think is a benefit that people really need to consider. All right, let's see. Next, how to include paratriathletes. So one of the things that, people are always asking me, being on the committee, in the Paratriathlon committee, is, how do we get paratriathletes to get involved in what we're doing? Whether you're a race director, you're a coach, or club, or you're just somebody who's passionate about getting people involved, there is kind of a really disconnect for the able-bodied world. Our able-bodied friends, our non-disabled friends, don't understand kind of some of the workings in the disability community. And I'll get into that a little bit, where you can really find these athletes and how you can access that. But, one of the biggest things to being able to include a paratriathlete, in my opinion, is being able to understand, being flexible with them and what they have to go through, being able to understand their differences and needs. Everybody is different. I mean, if you have an athlete who comes in and they had a hard day at work, or were fighting with their kids, or just, couldn't perform at the level they wanted, and you're a coach, you're going to give them a break. Well, the same thing goes for an athlete with a disability. Now they're going to take a little bit longer to get out of their chair. They're going to take longer to get in their prosthetic, so you're going to have to adjust for that. You're going to have to accommodate for that, and just understand that's how they adapt. That's how they do it. They're doing their best. they're not trying to slow up the rest of the team. So, and one of the best ways you can find out what those needs are and those differences are is by asking. Don't assume you know. Just take the ability to sit down with this person, get to understand them a little bit better, and really understand how they work and what they need and their accommodations. And you'll find usually it's not a lot. Most people with disabilities don't need a lot when it comes to being able to get involved in adapting to the sport. One of the other things that you want to consider is a barrier to the sport for these athletes, which might prohibit their access to participation. One of those things is access. If you're going to do a race on a beach and there's a bunch of sand, you're going to have a hard time with wheelchair athletes and amputees without prosthetics hopping and moving around in the sand. Did you get the appropriate mats to be able to get them down to the beach? Do you have the appropriate things to give them access in the transition areas? Or if you are working in a club or you're a coach and you're doing a workout, are you thinking about how to include those athletes in the workout, where they run? If you want to do your workout on grass, is that going to work for somebody who's in a wheelchair? And you really, it takes a little bit of extra thinking, but it doesn't mean you got to change what you're doing in your coaching style and what you're asking of the athletes. For the most part, a lot of times it's just taking into consideration the access to get to your practice or your race. One of the things here too is there's some common misconceptions about including athletes with physical disabilities that I want to talk about. And some of this might seem completely obvious, but it needs to be said. A lot of people don't really understand disabilities as much as they think, or they too scared to ask. And one of the things that a lot of people think are that people with disabilities require a lot of help. Actually, we're mostly self-sufficient. We live daily lives on our own. We get to and from where we need to go without really getting help from anybody. And so when we show up to a practice or a race, we don't need you to open the door, or unless we ask, just like anybody. But for the most part, we can take care of ourselves. We can do what we need to do on our own. People think that someone with a disability can get hurt easily. Yeah, we may have gotten hurt, but it doesn't mean that we need to be wrapped in a bubble and that we can't live life to the fullest. There are risks living life every day, but when you've had a disability, it doesn't mean you're more apt to get another disability. Okay, it could happen to anybody anytime. So don't think that people can't do sports or anything like that because they may get hurt again. That's their choice. They need more accommodations than most. This isn't true. Most people actually will find their own way to adjust. Sometimes it's as simple as they need a chair, or they just need to, have an accessible ramp to be able to get to the facilities. And usually with today's ADA laws, those things are already in place. They're not competitive athletes. I will tell you that is absolutely not true. I've had my butt kicked by several of these competitive athletes, and I've seen a lot of my friends win races that were 100% able-bodied races. Everybody else was non-disabled, and they were the only disabled athlete, and they were number one in their age group. And it really depends on the race and where it's at, but that is a farce. I can tell you right now, most people with disabilities are very competitive. They're very athletic, and sometimes they can blow the doors off of most people. So don't ever assume that the person showing up can't do the workout or can't complete the race. And then all disabilities are visible or recognizable. You will find that there are a lot of people out there that have disabilities like CP that are mild, or MS, that you will never know what they're going through, but they affect their physiology in a way that is going to need accommodations, or is going to need some kind of accessibility to be able to compete. So just know that when somebody brings it up to you, if you don't see it right away, ask a little bit more to understand their disability, but don't assume that they don't have one or that they're lying to you. And then let's see. So going into things to consider, I put some of these cartoons because they really are representative of what I've seen in my life. Like I've said about like the people helping, perhaps it wasn't such a good idea to help them out without asking. Sometimes you can actually hinder an athlete or a person with a disability ability to do what they're trying to do by overly helping. Ask first before you try to help. The wheelchair access is one. I thought that was pretty funny over there. And then one of the ones that is just crazy to me is, I didn't say it earlier, but there is a difference between when people talk about disabilities in general, cognitive versus physical. We've got a lot of athletes that have cognitive disabilities that are doing triathlon, And a lot of that is on the mental side where, processing and understanding and other things that are not issues that people with physical disabilities necessarily have. But a lot of times you can find an athlete may have problems speaking because of their physical disability, like a TBI or cerebral palsy, but that they're cognitively 100% able to process and understand. And what I'll find is a lot of people, regardless of the communication issues, will talk to people with disabilities in a slow tone or a diminutive tone. They'll speak to them as if they're a child, and it's really degrading. And you want to really think about that. You want to talk to people with respect. One of the things I wrote down here is consider the first person language. You don't want to say that crippled guy doing triathlons or that disabled guy swimming. You want to say that the person first, athlete, that athlete over there who happens to use a wheelchair, or that triathlete who is an amputee or he's a paratriathlete. You want to use those person first nouns to be able to address somebody. You don't really want to address the disability as the first way to describe somebody. We are people. A lot of us don't see ourselves as disabled. I can tell you, I'm missing a leg. I'm above the knee. I know I walk funny. I forget I walk funny because I think I'm strutting and I'm strolling and I have no idea because I don't consider myself disabled. I can get around. I can handle things. I can do everything on my own. I'm independent, but I don't have a problem with the word disabled. But when you call me a disabled athlete, well, I'm an athlete who happens to have a disability. So keep that kind of stuff in mind. You want to be positive person first language. You want to allow these athletes to have independence. You want to allow them to do their own thing. You want to recognize the difference between empathy and pity. You don't want to have pity on an athlete who has a disability. They don't want that. It's demeaning. Empathy is great. You want to understand where they've come from, what they've been through, and how, the challenges that got them to where they're at. But you don't need to have pity on them for it, which leads me to the inspiration word. We get a lot of people will say you're inspirational, and I get that in the airport. And I'm like, why? Because I'm catching a flight? That's what everybody else is doing. I don't understand the difference between me doing it and you doing it, or being at the grocery store. And it's the same with the triathlon. I understand the good-heartedness, and the athletes that I'm friends with, we all understand the good-heartedness behind people saying you're an inspiration. But we're really out there just doing a triathlon like everyone else. We really just want to be a part of it and compete like everybody else. So one of the things I usually say back to them is, you're an inspiration. You're my inspiration. And really kind of people, I think it takes them back a little bit. But it is true. It's really not necessary. We like just as much encouragement as everybody else, but you can say, hey, you're killing it. You're doing great. Keep going. I have friends that don't care if you say inspiration. It really doesn't actually bother me that much, but I also have friends that it really gets under their skin, and it is a big topic in the disability community. And then where to find new paratriathletes. So if you are trying to get more people engaged and you want to be more diverse and inclusive in your club or your races, there's a lot of places that you can work on and that are already, or you can connect with, that are already involved in the triathlon USAT world. And I'll get to those a little bit later. But if you're just trying to look in your general community, or you want to find the best way to go about finding people with disabilities that may have a possible interest, there are a lot of adaptive sports organizations around the United States. Adaptive sports organizations, or ASOs, are great places to really recruit people into the sport. A lot of people love the sport of triathlon because they're already doing one of the three sports. It's cross training for a lot of great sports. And so if you really want to find new athletes, I'd say reach out to some of these adaptive sports groups. You can find a great list of them on the USOPC's website. They have a U.S. Paralympic Club Finder. There's a large organization for adaptive athletes called Move United. It used to be Disabled Sports USA and Adaptive Sports USA, and they just combined. And they actually sanction, I think, over 200 chapters around the United States. So they're a great place to really find people in your area, or find organizations in your area, to let them know that you are inclusive and willing to be able to take athletes in. So take a look at those. And then here's some resources before we get to a little bit of the Q&A session. Hopefully I haven't bored too many people to this point, but we'll make this quick. One of the best resources that you can find at USAT is our Paratriathlon committee. We've got some amazing people. We've got board members. We've got some athletes, coaches included on this, as well as some leaders in adaptive sports organizations like myself, who really just are committed to being able to help with the grassroots side of getting people involved in the sport. We've been very focused on a lot of things. We helped get the Paratriathlon Open Division in. We helped get a lot of funding for athletes to get to events like nationals. And I do feel like we've really done a great job on helping race directors understand if their races are paratriathlon friendly. And I'll discuss that in a second. But we have a large focus on getting youth athletes into the sport. And this committee really is seeing that there's a lack of kids with disabilities who see this sport as an option. And we want to be able to open that up to younger athletes. You know, on the able-bodied side, I know that we probably have lower numbers than we do have adults for kids just as much. And it's probably the same issue as getting traction to understand this is a sport that has a lot of needs when it comes to equipment and funding, but it is a great sport for kids. And so we are really committed to trying to get more kids into the sport, building our pipeline, finding new athletes that can help, you know, create the national team in years to come, and just getting people to fall in love with the sport. So in general, you got some great people here that can reach out. You can reach out to the Paratriathlon committee and ask us any questions if it's you know, pertaining to paratriathlon, USA Triathlon, or anything for United States triathlon in the United States. And as I mentioned before, one of the things that like I'm really proud of that we've done to help with the inclusion factor is that we put together it's a form that race directors can use. It's part of the race director toolbox. And you can go to the race director toolbox on the website, USAT website, and there's a paratriathlon section. It has some information here. And coach or race directors can say, you know, I want more paratriathletes to come to my race. And they can fill out this form. And what it does is it asks questions about the race itself, what the terrain is like, where it's being held, what kind of things are you doing to make accommodations for just athletes as is. And with that form, we're able to make a judgment if your race is paratriathlon friendly. And there are two types of paratriathlon friendly. We know that not every race can be friendly for our wheelchair friends, or our friends in wheelchairs, I should say. But we do know that might be a race that would work for somebody who is ambulatory or for a VI athlete. So we have a kind of a all general paratriathlon friendly that says it's open for everybody. And then we also designate races that are ambulatory friendly, and that helps pull some other athletes in. So if you're interested in knowing more about this, you can just check the race director toolbox, or you can go to the website and look on the paratriathlon section, or you can just email paratriathlon@usatriathlon.org and connect with the committee and Amanda Duke-Belay and anybody else who's in the paratriathlon area. So here's three other resources that are great resources outside of USA Triathlon that are extremely involved in the sport of triathlon, that can help not only, you know, coaches and race directors, but the athletes themselves. If an athlete comes and says, I'd love to do the sport, but I don't have the means, I don't have the understanding of the sport, I don't have the adaptations to be able to do the sport, or I don't have the equipment. These organizations are all out there helping athletes right now do triathlons. Like I said, I've been involved with Challenge Athletes for over 17 years now, through my years of volunteering and then my years as an employee. And I was around in 2009 when we put on the first paratriathlon camp for adults. I've personally put on over 25 paratriathlon camps with adults and kids. We just got to be able to recently create, with a partnership with USA Triathlon, a junior development team. And we have 5 phenomenal juniors who we're looking to have a phenomenal season until our friend, the COVID-19 came and put a squash on that. But we look forward to continue that. I know our other friends at Dare to Try and Catapult have teams of their own, and they do camps of their own. And there's a lot of resources financially to help athletes through these organizations. So please check them out. Please, you know, connect with USA Paratriathlon, and you can reach out to me or anybody who's involved with USA Paratriathlon or the committee, and we can help with any of the resources or any information that you might need. And with that, I will go ahead and end my boring spiel and open it up if anybody wants to ask any questions.
Boring? What do you mean boring? I'm sitting here like, oh my gosh, how can we get more information? Will we be able to get these slides? Not boring by far. You gave so much information and just, it was very thorough, and I'm grateful for all the information. So I have some questions. Let's try to get to this. We have a few minutes. So thank you, Travis, for that thoroughness. I mean, it was amazing. First question. Have you come across para-athletes who need emotional support? If so, what resources do you have to direct them?
Yeah, that's something that honestly we're dealing with on the COVID side of things with all athletes right now, is how do you provide people with resources? And I even dealt with that myself as an athlete, struggling with trying to make national teams and just trying to compete at a higher level and not being able to perform the ways I want. I actually sought out personally sports psychologists myself. I think they're very helpful. And I think that as an athlete, they're very in tune with the mindset of an athlete. And on the disability side, I think there's a lot of stuff that's out there and available. But personally, I don't think through my job or with USAT, that's an area that we focus on because it's not our expertise. But we are always willing to go help athletes connect with the right resources depending on the situation they're in.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to try to get through these questions because we do have a lot. That's just how, engaging it was.
I'll try to be
Okay, thank you. What are the main reasons why race directors do not include para division in their races?
There's a couple factors that I've found in my years of working with the committee is sometimes they don't have the money to add the extra division for the medals. And we usually come back and say the committee will help you cover that. Or, if you really think about it, it's only 9 more medals or whatever the cost is. And when they really do go through the excuses that they have, we're able to walk them through why that actually isn't true. But sometimes they think, like I said before, that working with an athlete is going to take a lot of work. I've got to make all these accommodations for them. And when we actually connect with the race directors, it's simple as saying, well, in your transition area, the only thing they need is where you would take a rack and put 10 bikes, you leave room for 5 athletes instead because they have 2 pieces of equipment. You would want to put like a chair out. And what I tell a lot of people, because not every race director has an athlete show up, so they don't want to put on a para division for nobody who's going to be there. And I understand that. Like, why would you promote it? And why would you do it if you don't have people who are going to be involved? And a lot of the times it's, or I've got 3 athletes or so. And what we tell them is, well, they deserve the right to be recognized. And the more you include them, the more people will show up because they know there's inclusion. And a lot of times it makes sense and they start to do it. But when you explain to them that some of the small things that they think are hassle ends up not being that big a deal, they're apt to really change their mind and work with you. But I do think it's lack of involvement from the athletes. And then a lot of athletes show up on the day of and say, hey, you got to make accommodations for me. And I'll be very honest with you, as somebody who's disabled in this world, that doesn't fly anywhere you go. You got to prepare and on your own. Call the race director ahead of time. Let them know what your needs are. Let them know what you're doing and you're coming, and don't blindside them on the day of and request, and expect to get your request fulfilled. So I think that's a lot of it.
Sorry, thank you so much. What are the barriers to coaching para athletes? Aside from doing the USAT para certification, how does a coach get involved?
The USAT para certification, I remember taking my level 1 certification years ago, and there was a section in the book at the time of Paratriathlon, and I think it was like 2 paragraphs. And I remember just me and another para athlete we were in, I think, Tennessee taking that test. And I was doing it strictly for the fact I wanted to be educated and share information with athletes. Wasn't planning on really coaching, but wanted to go through the certification process. And I was kind of appalled that there was barely a mention, and the chapter was really skimmed over and never really introduced. And so I'm extremely pleased with what USAT has done to include Paratriathlon in their certification process and getting coaches that education. because I think that the biggest thing about working with an athlete with a disability isn't the way you coach. You still coach triathlon the same. I mean, we still do intervals, we swim, we still do, all the same training, that everybody else does. We worry about our heart rate, and we go out and we look at VO2 max, and all that stuff is still the same for disabled athlete. But what most coaches need to understand is how those things affect certain athletes. Like, if you don't know, paraplegics and quadriplegics don't sweat below their injury. So you can take a quadriplegic out into a race, like in Lubbock, Texas. I think Buffalo Springs is a qualifier for Ironman. A lot of guys go out and do that half Ironman. I had a coworker who went strictly to be able to go next to the athlete and put water on them so they wouldn't overheat. Right. And so it's understanding physiological differences in people with disability, understanding how to accommodate, helping people with transitioning from their chair out, understanding the rules of working with people. I think all those things are important, and I believe they go over that in the paratriathlon instruction.
That's good to know. And I don't think people know that, but thank God for kind-hearted people who will go out of their way to do a race so that they can be supportive of someone else. Gotta love triathletes. Travis, as an able-bodied triathlete coach and official, what should I do to better myself as a volunteer? And that's from Mr. Andy Murphy.
I think what I would tell people, if you want to understand the adaptive side of the world of triathlon, and you want to volunteer, the first thing I'd say is just go be around people with disabilities. Go volunteer at an adaptive sports organization and get comfortable being around. Because I feel like most people, the reason why they shy away from people with disabilities is it's the fear of the unknown. And what you'll find is most of us are more than outgoing. We'll probably tell you more than you want to know about our disability. But the more you're around people, the less uncomfortable it is to ask questions or to understand what people are going through. And then I would say volunteer at a race that has a paratriathlon event. Volunteer as, someone who's working with the athlete or at least involved in the race itself. Volunteer in your own time to help a visually impaired or blind athlete. If you love doing triathlon and you want to help somebody do it, there is no better way to help an athlete than helping a visually impaired or blind athlete by being a pilot, by being a guide, and really getting out there and actually racing with them. So I would say do that. I'd reach out to the committee or reach out to USA Paratriathlon and just say you want to be more involved. And I guarantee you we can find ways for you to do that.
And I'm sure USAT, the committee, will have places on the pilot to be pilots and guides. They'll have organizations they can reach out to.
Yeah, there's organizations that have set up, like one of our athletes, Aaron Scheides, did his own organization, and that organization has worked really well with like connecting people and getting people involved. Carolyn Gaynor, who is on our committee, is actually a guide herself, and she's worked with the Team Red, White, and Blue, and helped a lot of athletes as well. So, she does a lot of personal connection. And I think that there's a lot of us who understand, the places to send people, and we can definitely do that.
Thank you so much for answering that. And that was also from Andrew Murphy, who said to give you a shout out from Pensacola Beach. So,
hey, I miss Pensacola.
Yeah, down there in the Panhandle. All right. Our next question is, do you have recommendations on where we can learn more, specifically about the types of accommodations we should think about for workouts? Chrissy says she admittedly would not have recognized some of these barriers like sand that you mentioned, or something that she needs to work on to better understand.
The first thing I would say is build your workout, build it out. And then if you have an adaptive athlete, send it to them ahead of time and just say, here's the workout, here's the plan. Is there anything in here that doesn't work for you? Can we modify it? That's the first thing I would say, because every athlete, the one thing I can tell you right now, that goes a long way in just the respect factor, to know that you took it into consideration instead of just showing up and being like, oh yeah, I forgot you can't do that. I think that's one of the things I hate the worst to hear as an athlete working with a coach is, oh, I didn't realize, or I forgot you can't do those things. It means I was an afterthought. So really take your athletes into consideration, and what they can't do. If you already know, once you start to learn, you'll be able to modify these things real easy. But talk to them. They know what they can't do. They know what they can do, and they can be very creative in working with you to modify some of these workouts. But the one thing I can tell you is don't separate them from the rest of the team. The inclusion side of things is so important to being a person with a disability. Is, you know, I consider myself a triathlete. I'm not a disabled triathlete. I just happen to be a triathlete with a disability. So I don't need to be in the disabled triathlete group. I want to be with all my friends. Now, it does come with the knowledge that I may not be as fast as everybody else, but I want to be there through the workouts. I want to hear the coach, and I want to be involved and not forgotten or pushed aside.
That's good. Thank you so much for answering that. What recommendations do you have for a future physical therapist that wants to get involved in paratriathlon?
I would tell you, volunteer for one of the camps from those 3 groups that I said. You know, there's so, and actually, you know what, I forgot to put, USAT is running their own paratriathlon camps as well. So, you know, there's a lot of opportunity to, you know, to be honest with you, I love our physical therapists and our physical therapy students. I do a lot of clinics around the United States through my work where we teach amputees how to run. And we could not do those without the physical therapy students. They come out in droves to work with our coaches and our athletes, and they make the difference. And I would tell you, come to a camp, especially beginners camps. We absolutely can use, you know, the physical therapy understanding that comes with those volunteers. And then the fact that you want to be out there doing a triathlon with us, and then you have the knowledge of how to help us, is huge. So I would say reach out to all 3 groups: Challenge Athletes Foundation, Dare to Try, and then Catapult, as well as USAT. Let them know you're interested, you want to volunteer, and then we would love to have you out for sure.
Thank you. We got time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. What are common misconceptions about paratriathlon, and how can allies change these perceptions?
Well, I think one of the things I said earlier was it's not competitive is a misconception. It is so stinking. There's a reason I'm not competing on a national level anymore, and I do it recreationally. These guys that are out there are killing it, and they're putting up times that, you know, some of our Olympians were putting up years ago, right? And these guys are missing limbs and they're in wheelchairs, and you know, I think some course records have been set by some of our athletes. And so by no means are they not competitive. They are phenomenal athletes. They take their job as an athlete, a national team athlete, like serious. I know a lot of our you know, athletes that are trying to get to Tokyo, they watch their nutrition. They are tuning in their gear. They spend a lot of money to be able to be the best in the sport. So, you know, don't look at somebody with disability and have that pity factor. I'd say, you know, they're coming, and they're coming probably for you, because there's nothing better as a disabled athlete to know that you beat a couple able-bodied athletes in a race. So that's a big misconception. And I'd say the only other one that I really know about is a lot of the Paralympics is not the Special Olympics. And, you know, it's not to say the Special Olympics is amazing, and those athletes are phenomenal, and we love what they do. And the Special Olympics has put on something amazing for that group of individuals and the cognitive side of disability. But when it comes to Paralympics, you know, the reason why it's called Paralympics is because it's parallel to the Olympics. And, you know, we are wanting to be considered athletes just like them. Everybody is cognitive, and we may have physical limitations, but we are definitely in a whole different group. And I know that a lot of times people are like, oh, I saw the Special Olympics on TV. You guys are amazing. And I know sometimes they're mean the Paralympics and they don't, but really understand the difference between Olympics and Paralympic and Special Olympic athletes.
Thank you so much for asking that. I just want to say, Travis, thank you so much. This particular session alone just probably opened my mind to just certain key words about inspiration, because I've said that before. So I just want to apologize to you on behalf of all the people that I've said that to, and all of the athletes that I've said that to, because, you know, we just don't know. And now that I know, I'm more educated, I can better, you know, not use that terminology. Thank you for your time. This has been great. And thank you.
That was It's been my pleasure. And I'll tell you the inspirational thing, I think we all understand. I think it's about education, just like all this is about letting people know why it's kind of hard for our athletes to take in, because we just don't understand why we're an inspiration when we're just living, we're just doing our thing. So I've been so glad to be here. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this, and hopefully I was able to help a lot of people understand a little bit more about paratri.